When you think about Mexico, images of pristine beaches probably flood your mind. With over 9,330 kilometers of coastline along the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea, you'd expect massive port cities lining the shores. But here's the strange part. Mexico's largest cities are hundreds of kilometers inland, perched high on mountains and plateaus. Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Puebla all sit far from any ocean. The biggest coastal city? Tijuana, with just 2 million people. Compare that to the United States, where New York, Los Angeles, and Houston dominate the coasts, or Brazil, where Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo hug the Atlantic. So what's going on? Why did Mexico, a country defined by its coastline, grow its biggest cities hundreds of kilometers from the sea? Let's uncover how mountains, climate, and history conspired to push an entire civilization inland. Mexico's geography tells a story that most people never see. The country sits on a massive elevated plateau called the Mexican Altiplano, which stretches across the heart of the nation. This isn't just any plateau. It sits between roughly 1,800 and 2,200 meters above sea level, making it one of North America's highest inhabited regions. Many of Mexico's largest cities cluster on the southern part of the plateau, around 2,000 meters, where the climate is especially mild and the land especially inviting for settlement. Two enormous mountain ranges squeeze this plateau from both sides. The Sierra Madre Occidental runs for more than 1,200 kilometers along the Pacific, while the Sierra Madre Oriental stretches a similar distance parallel to the Gulf of Mexico, with peaks surpassing 3,000 meters. Getting from the coast to the interior means climbing through steep, rugged terrain that made transportation incredibly difficult for centuries. But here's what makes the plateau special. Despite being in the tropics, its high elevation creates a moderate climate with temperatures averaging 17 degrees Celsius year-round. The coastal lowlands, meanwhile, swelter in tropical heat that can reach 49 degrees Celsius in summer, with humidity that makes breathing feel like work. Centuries of settlers, from pre-Hispanic farmers to Spanish colonizers, divided Mexico into climate zones defined by elevation. The coasts were called Tierra Caliente, or hot land. The plateau became Tierra Fria, or cold land, though it's really more like a permanent spring. That reflected how altitude shaped daily life. Thanks to ancient volcanic activity, its soils became remarkably fertile, ideal for growing corn, beans, and other staple crops. Meanwhile, much of the Pacific coast is narrow, squeezed between mountains and sea with thin, rocky soil. All these geographic factors encourage settlement inland rather than on the coast. And that's exactly what happened, but the story goes much deeper than just geography. You see, long before Europeans arrived, indigenous people had already made their choice. The Aztecs founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, on an island in Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico in 1325. That choice was anything but accidental. The valley sat at 2,240 meters elevation with mild temperatures between 12 degrees Celsius and 15 degrees Celsius. Perfect for large-scale agriculture, the area had been attracting human settlement for at least 12,000 years. At its height, it spanned around 13 to 15 square kilometers and housed between 150 and 250,000 people, rivaling any European city of the time. The Aztecs built sophisticated chinampas, or raised fields, in the shallow lake waters. These floating gardens could produce multiple harvests per year thanks to the mild climate and abundant water. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés marveled at the city's main market, estimating it served 60,000 people daily. The Aztecs didn't avoid coasts by accident. Coastal cities were harder to defend and easier for enemies to raid and escape from. An inland capital meant any invading force had to travel hundreds of kilometers through controlled territory before reaching the heart of the empire. The surrounding lake system provided natural defenses and made transportation of goods throughout the valley incredibly efficient. When Cortés conquered the Tenochtitlan in 1521, he made a critical decision. Rather than abandon the city and build on the coast, the Spanish built Mexico City directly on top of the Aztec ruins. They recognized what the Aztecs knew. The Valley of Mexico was the center of the country's population and history, with established trade networks and agricultural systems. Starting from scratch on the coast would have meant giving up centuries of development. But this decision set Mexico on a very different path from its neighbors, and the reasons go beyond just honoring the past. Mexico did have one major coastal city during the colonial period, Veracruz, and its history reveals exactly why coastal development struggled. Veracruz served as the chief link between colonial Mexico and Spain, the port where treasure ships loaded with gold and silver departed for Europe. That wealth attracted every pirate and privateer sailing the Caribbean. In 1683, Dutch pirate Laurens de Graaf led around 1,300 men in a surprise attack on Veracruz. They overran the city at dawn and looted it for several days, taking hostages and valuables before retreating to sea. The pirates even captured between 1,000 and 1,500 people and sold them into slavery in the Caribbean. This wasn't an isolated incident. British pirates like Francis Drake and John Hawkins repeatedly attacked Spanish treasure ships throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. The Spanish response? They built the massive Fort San Juan de Ulua, with stone walls up to a meter thick and more than 150 cannons guarding the harbour. But even that couldn't stop all attacks. Veracruz suffered invasions by France and the United States multiple times in the 19th century. The city's vulnerability made it a liability rather than an asset. Compare this to inland Mexico City. The Spanish capital sat 50 kilometers from even the nearest edge of the Valley of Mexico and hundreds of kilometers from any coast. An attacking force would have to march through mountains, fight past defensive positions, and supply an army across difficult terrain. The geography itself became their best fortress. Spanish colonial officials worried constantly about foreign invasion through coastal cities. After Britain seized Spanish ports in Havana and Manila in 1762, Spain increased coastal fortifications across Mexico, but they never moved the capital to the coast. The interior plateau remained the safest, most prosperous place to build, and geography had even more tricks up its sleeve. Even if Mexico wanted massive coastal cities, the geography wouldn't cooperate. The Pacific coast of Mexico has a critical problem. The Sierra Madre Occidental mountains run parallel to the coast, often coming right down to the sea. This creates dramatic scenery but terrible conditions for major ports. The narrow Pacific coastal plain gets squeezed between mountains and ocean, leaving little flat land for cities to expand. Natural deep water harbors are rare alongside Mexico's rugged Pacific coast. The few that exist, like Acapulco, faced another problem. They had no easy overland connection to the interior plateau where most people lived. Moving goods meant hauling them up steep mountain passes, making trade expensive and slow. Others like Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas developed only later with modern engineering and transport links. Mexico's economy was historically oriented north-south by land rather than east-west by sea. The plateau created a natural corridor for the Texas border down to Mexico City and beyond. Silver from the mines of Zacatecas could travel overland to Mexico City much easier than trying to ship it to the coast, up to a port, and then by sea. The geography favored land routes, not ocean trade. On the Gulf of Mexico side, things looked only slightly better. The Gulf coastal plain is wider than its Pacific counterpart. Hurricanes strike this coast frequently between June and November. More than 40 major storms have hit the Gulf of Mexico since the mid-20th century alone. The Yucatan Peninsula has beautiful beaches, but sits far from Mexico's population center. Cancun, on the Caribbean coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, now houses nearly 900,000 residents with a metro population over 1 million, but its growth was driven by tourism in the late 20th century rather than historic port trade. Most of Mexico's coastline remained underdeveloped until recently. Without good harbors, easy access to the interior, or protection from natural disasters, there was little incentive to build large cities on the coast. The plateau offered everything people needed: better climate, soil, defenses, and better trade routes. But one final factor cemented Mexico's interior focus. Stand at sea level in Veracruz during summer. Temperatures average 25 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius, but humidity makes it feel much hotter. The air is thick and oppressive. Disease-carrying mosquitoes thrive in the tropical heat. Before modern medicine, coastal cities were perilous. In the 17th to 19th centuries, outbreaks of yellow fever and malaria repeatedly devastated Veracruz and other tropical ports, killing thousands each year. Now climb to Mexico City. The temperature drops to a comfortable 17 degrees Celsius average year-round. The air is crisp and clear at 2,240 meters elevation. Mosquitoes can't survive well at this altitude. Crops grow abundantly in the moderate climate. The Spanish even created a classification system. Tierra caliente below 900 meters was hot land, often unhealthy and uncomfortable. Tierra templada from 900 to 1,800 meters was temperate land. Tierra fría above 1,800 meters was cold land, though the name is misleading since the climate is actually quite pleasant. About half of Mexico's population lives on the Central Plateau, an area that represents only a small fraction of the country's total land. The plateau's elevation created a perfect sweet spot for human habitation. Warm enough to grow food easily, cool enough to stay comfortable, and high enough to avoid many tropical diseases. Why would anyone choose to live in the sweltering heat of the coasts when paradise exists inland? Only in the modern era, with air conditioning, better transportation, and tourism, have Mexico's coasts begun to grow. Cancun didn't even exist as a major city until the 1970s. Even today, most of Mexico's biggest cities, like Mexico City, Guadalajara, Puebla, and León, lie inland on the Central Plateau. Only a few, such as Tijuana and Mérida, approach the coasts, and even they owe their growth to border trade or tourism rather than seaport activity. The pattern, established thousands of years ago by the Aztecs and reinforced by Spanish colonizers, still holds. Mexico remains a country that turns its back to the sea and faces inward to the mountains, where the elevation, climate, and geography created the perfect conditions for civilization to flourish. It's wild, isn't it? A country with endless beaches, yet most of its people live far from the sea. So what do you think shaped Mexico more, its geography or its history? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoy exploring how the world's landscapes shape entire nations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this.